Smile. Hare Krishna. 4 months ago, I went to India. Here I am, back. A little more Krishna conscious than when I left. And with me is my dear God brother, Pancharatna. And he is a great expert on Prabhupada. So I invited him. So we're going to interrogate him. We're going to ask the questions nobody can answer.
Including me.
Yeah, so we'll see. Yeah, maybe we can't answer them also, but we can ask them. So, if you read the introduction that was emailed out, we said we're going to talk about Prabhupada as Guru and Prabhupada as the person. And what that means is, does Prabhupada have a personal aspect distinct from his aspect of Guru? Is there, in questions such as, why is it that Prabhupada changed opinions? Why did he do things that seemed that weren't the best? Things didn't work out, and questions like that. So, let's start with the morning walk conversation where Prabhupada was asked if he knows everything. Yeah. You know that conversation?
I'm familiar with it. I can't quote it, but as I recall, basically he was asked. Not specifically him, but is the pure devotee omniscient?
Right.
And it was like, that's not a good question. Of course not.
Yeah.
Exactly. Krishna is omniscient.
Yeah, exactly. And then what did he say? He said something, you judge the pure devotee by how he's affecting other people, his preaching, how he's making other people Krishna conscious. And the question was also, sometimes the pure devotee seems to forget something and not know something. So, but other times you hear devotees saying, it seemed that Prabhupada knew what was on my mind. Or I remember a story where a devotee was doubting Prabhupada, and Prabhupada said, just do what I say, don't doubt the spiritual master. So then you have that other side. So how do you adjust those two sides? And are they distinct, and can you tell?
Well, I think the first thing we always have to keep in mind is that we're in our relationship with Srila Prabhupada, we're always trying to please him, and we have to be aware of what he wants, and sometimes he wants us to question or to challenge or perhaps come up with another idea. I mean,
an example?
I know in the case of Tamal Krishna Maharaj relates this a few times, where he would Prabhupada would have some plan, but then he would ask, "What do you think?" Inviting him to critique his ideas and engage in constructive argumentation, and they would argue. And
not many people would argue with Prabhupada, but a few would.
But because it was to please Prabhupada. Tamal's arguing with Prabhupada was because he knew that Prabhupada wanted him to do that. He wanted him to challenge, to bring out, and to find the best for Krishna's service.
Weren't there some times when devotee would do that, and Prabhupada would just say, "Don't try to control your spiritual master"? And was that just something personal that Prabhupada just said, "No, this is the way I want it, and do it this way," because he wasn't inviting that?
He wasn't. We always have to remember this principle of bhavagrahi janardana, that both Guru and Krishna are looking for the mood and the bhava, the what's behind it. And when a devotee would bring his pride or his false ego into the equation, then it was time to back off. And Srila Prabhupada would let you know that.
There's a story Dhananjaya tells. He bought a bell, and he wanted to hang the bell in front of the temple. And Prabhupada said, "Hang it on the tree in the temple." And Dhananjaya said, "No, it's going in the front." And Prabhupada said, "I say hang it on the tree. That's, where I would want." And he refused. And eventually it got hung on the front of the temple, and Prabhupada said, "Okay, have the chowkidar ring it every hour. That way we'll know if the chowkidar is awake. And Prabhupada made sure that it was Dhananjaya's responsibility. He woke him up once, at like 2 a.m, because Prabhupada didn't hear the bell ring.
Yeah.
So, but Dhananjaya said eventually Prabhupada liked the fact that the bell was put in front of the temple and the chowkidar rang it. So his understanding was that Prabhupada didn't mind that I disagreed with him because it came, or he wanted me to use my intelligence. So then how could you really distinguish? Because when he was telling the story, I was thinking, well, Prabhupada wanted on the tree, I would have just put it on the tree, I wouldn't have argued. But Dhananjaya, it seemed like he was almost attached. No, this bell is not for the tree, it's not to hang there, it's to hang in another place. And he felt confident.
We don't know, of course, what was in Dhananjaya's mind. We'll have to ask him. But let's assume that he was simply trying to do the best. He was trying to understand Prabhupada's intention, his mood, his desire, what he was trying to achieve, what he was trying to accomplish, and then using his intelligence in order to please the mission, the mood, to achieve the goal that Srila Prabhupada had.
Okay, so then you have the statement that Prabhupada made about his spiritual master. When he's right, and when he's wrong, he's right. Which seems to indicate that when my spiritual master says something, even if I think it's wrong, I should realize it's my fault, my subjective view.
Well, there's two ways to take that. It's not to take... One way is sort of literally that wrong becomes right, which is illogical. Wrong is wrong. But the other way to take it is that even when he's wrong, he's right in the sense that he's doing it for Krishna. It's service. So it's like everything
but now you're saying Prabhupada could do something wrong, because the way I took that, or I think many people take it, is I think it's wrong, but it's right, and it's just my subjective view. So when I say he's wrong, he's right. Of course, then you have the other problem when objectively it's not right. It's just it's misinformation, or it's something he's not aware of.
I mean, take the most simple examples are Prabhupada's language, which he many times told us. My language is not perfect. He would misspell word. How many times would he call some devotee by the wrong name? And to say, well, that's not literally wrong would be ridiculous. It's wrong and yet not wrong. It's one of these, Beda Bade. It's wrong in the sense of literal wrongness, but it's right in the sense of its energy, its mood, its application, its purpose, its quality.
So then, sometimes Prabhupada would say something, and a devotee would say, well, what he's saying isn't right. It's just something that he heard or he read in a newspaper or magazine, or he was told, or he learned when he went to school, and research has shown that it's not true anymore. But Prabhupada never presented it. He didn't present it as absolute Vedic knowledge. At the same time, he presented it. Or and of course, in other times he would just say, well, this is my opinion. So how do we deal with those situations? I mean, how do we... then we have to analyze the information, and then we say, well, Prabhupada believed this, but it's not correct, or that's what they believed in 1900. So, but he's using it in 1970. So, and then we as his followers tend to want to copy the way he preached, because he was the most successful preacher. And this is so. How do we understand that? Is it our duty not to do that? Is it like to end and say, okay, Prabhupada said that because that's what he was taught, but we know that's not true, and just end it there and say we can't repeat that? Or how do we deal with that?
I can only say how I deal with it. I think there are different devotees have their different ways of dealing with this,
but it also, there's an issue of faith, like when Prabhupada said, I was on a morning walk, and he said, I don't think they went to the moon, I think they went to Arizona. He said it looked like Arizona. And then he said they had the movie Godzilla, so they fabricated it so it looked like there's this huge monster. He said, so that was basically his opinion. Although, and he's saying, I think.
Yes.
But then he's also referring to Shastra and saying, well, the moon is further than the sun.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it also, there's a question of is it opinion, is it Shastra, and
well, we know it's not Shastra because there's nothing in Shastra that describes people going to the moon or with rockets or anything like that. So that is not something that you can go to Shastra and say, in Shastra it says that in 67, 68, this did not happen. That doesn't appear in any Bhagavatam shloka. So it's not Shastric. It is something that Srila Prabhupada had an opinion about. He based his opinion, obviously, on, because he talked about it, he based it on Shastric evidence and other kinds of evidence, and he came to an opinion.
So as a disciple, would it be offensive to not share
not
that
to
opinion?
share that opinion? I think it would be offensive to discount his opinion, I would say. I'd say, to me, it would be offensive to say, well, this is off the wall, this is simply to consider that his opinions were in some way, even if they were wrong, and we don't know. I mean, there's no conclusive evidence one way or the other on something like that. So we can't say for sure this was right or this was wrong. And we may personally tend towards some other opinion. But if we were to discount it and say that this is some an indication of a feeble intelligence, say, that would be, I'd consider that to be offensive.
Okay, so then what about another situation where he's not making his analysis, he's just repeating what he learned. And then we say, no, that's been proven false. That was what he learned in college. And it seems, from my opinion, that what he learned, that he thought that was accepted information, and he wasn't questioning whether it's true or not, but if people accepted it and he could use that to make a Krishna conscious point, then because they accept it, he'll use it. He did that often, Okay, this is what you accept, so if you accept this, therefore it proves our point. So, I mean, that's the way I see it. Okay, this information was given to him. It proves a point of our philosophy. He's using it. We later find out that the research has shown that's no longer true. Exactly. Is that a acceptable way of
excuse me,
acceptable way of dealing with that? Or because some people will say, well, if he accepted it, we should have faith in it. That he, in other words, he's, because people will go back to this omniscient thing, that he knows, he's transcendental, so he knows, and if it's not right, he wouldn't have said it. But it also seems it didn't even matter to him if it was right or not, because if people accepted it, it'll just, okay, you accept this, and this proves our point, so.
Yeah, and what's really at stake here? I mean, if we...
Disciples' faith might be.
Well, that's where we have to be careful, but we also have to be careful when it comes to our effect on society. If we hold to a position that has been, proven or is generally accepted as false, that may have been accepted in the past as true, then we just become foolish in the eyes of educated people. And whereas what you were just describing is a situation, well, if people believe this, I'll use this to make a point. If the opposite thing happens and you use that and you get the opposite result, you get people saying, well, but that's not right, and therefore your whole message must be somehow invalid, then we've defeated that. So I think we have to be very, very careful when we know that modern established good science. I think there's a difference between highly speculative science like evolutionary theory, cosmological origins of the universe and things like that, and things that are more standard in terms of physiology of human beings, for example.
Yeah, such as the size of the brain.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Which is...
They had bad scales in those days, I guess.
Not enough brains. Maybe, I don't know.
The people who came up with that theory had smaller brains, I guess.
Yeah, not enough samples. Who knows? But science, I mean, there's obviously rascal science. There's science which we would consider to be unscientific because it's really just theory.
And of course, Prabhupada's defeating that based on Vedic conclusions, where sometimes he's just making a point and he's not bringing any Vedic conclusion in other than taking the point, as I said, and then bringing in a Vedic conclusion that all supports it. Not to make that point, but to support the Vedic point, as opposed to making a Vedic, bringing in a conclusion from the Vedas, and we say, okay, evolution, we're against it, we don't believe it. It's not, it doesn't have a spiritual basis, and then quoting Shastra to show that's true. That's of course different.
And also then asking devotees to prove it.
Yeah.
He asked our scientific-minded PhDs, and so the whole Bhaktivedanta Institute was charged with the task of researching and coming up with science that would be accepted in the scientific world to prove or to at least support the Vedic conclusions.
Okay. So now I have another question. In retrospect, we may look at what Prabhupada did, and there's a tendency for some disciples, maybe even grand disciples, to analyze, not in a critical way, but to analyze why Prabhupada was doing it, to analyze the results of what he did, and then to perhaps reform a strategy which may seem to be different than what he originally intended. Or, of course, in some cases, he could have corrected himself or made indication that it should be reviewed. And in other cases, there's no indication. So, how do we deal with that? Where's the borderline when we're safe, and where's the border where we're in?
What's the Lakshman Rekha?
Yeah. Because regarding Gurukula, he said it was an experiment. He said our Gurukula experiment, so that it indicated, let's try it and let's see how it works. And Prabhupada did with many things. Let's try it, see how it works. Srila Prabhupada, why aren't you doing this anymore? Because it doesn't work. Is that our duty now to analyze that way, or are there certain things we should not analyze, or would it be foolish to not analyze certain things and just let them go on in a particular way?
Well, you remember that story Giriraj tells about in the last weeks of Srila Prabhupada's presence. About he was called in the night, and about how will our movement go on. And as I remember, Giriraj says, if we simply chant Hare Krishna and remain fixed in the sincere and the principles. And then what was Srila Prabhupada's response? He said, intelligence and organization.
Yeah.
So he expected us to use our intelligence and to be organized. And so if something's not working,
well, there's also the fault of overintelligence.
Yeah.
Something may not be working because it's the right thing to do and we're doing it in the wrong way, and we may be overintelligent and just change the whole program.
Right.
So is there, or even something that Prabhupada said that we may say it doesn't seem to be philosophically in line with previous acharyas, so when we're analyzing why he said it, it could be, on the other hand, that Prabhupada's saying that as an addition to the sampradaya, as a new realization. So how do we...
I think we have to be careful to distinguish between philosophical tattva, siddhantic concepts and principles and teachings and practical suggestions for how to spread Krishna consciousness. I mean, when it comes to, like you gave the example of the Gurukula, there's Siddhanta, there's Vedic culture and tradition behind the idea of Gurukula, which you can't mess with, you can't change that. But when you apply it, you have to, the same, desha kalapatra, the time, the place, the circumstances have to be all considered. So that's where intelligence is, to discriminate.
You have Prabhupada lays out, this is how the Gurukula should be, and he lays the standards, or this is how Grihastha ashram should be, or whatever. And then as the movement adjusts, particularly after Prabhupada's disappearance, we start adjusting because we can't seem to do it exactly the way Prabhupada did it. And then we have a rationale. Well,
yeah.
What would the rationale be? That Prabhupada's instructions were impractical, we can't do it? That's one rationale. Or the other rationale is we don't have the intelligence to do it. I mean, in so many areas, it's self-sufficiency, living off the land, the areas in which we failed that may even seem impractical, or society has, or we can say society has changed since Prabhupada has given certain instructions, or maybe we just changed and became more materialistic. So how do we deal with that? Again, it becomes the issue of faith. Is it that we could see, well, it's a lack of faith or perhaps a lack of understanding in the real principle behind his instruction and our lack of intelligence to execute it? Or is it our lack of intelligence to adjust it? I mean, or not our lack of intelligence, is it our intelligence to adjust it?
Well, I would go to the side that we should have faith. That in Srila Prabhupada's vision, his ability to conceive of a worldwide movement in broad terms, not necessarily in the details and in specific application and even strategies and methods and so on. But because I think that's another point of understanding Srila Prabhupada is, and his personality and how his personality comes into his writing, his speech, his way of presenting things. He was a very, and is, very bold. He was fond of strong language and visionary language. So when we take and look at his vision, his words, and his description of his how you should say, his, not commandments, but his instructions, then we need to take it in the big context. We have to take it not in isolation, but in the whole picture, and see where are the core principles, where are the things that are repeatedly showing up, and where are the details. And that's, we can adjust the details, but we have to have faith in the principles and the overall vision.
Some people are a little concerned about adjusting details when they see others adjusting details, and they feel that that's trespassing on unholy ground. So,
well, that's where does the detail? What's really a detail and what's a principle?
And are there certain areas which are more holy than others, or where you get to deity worship, you don't want to change anything. Yeah, that Prabhupada said that. But with something else like Gurukula, like we see today, the children at the age of 5, at least Western children, it wasn't good to leave their home. They needed the security of their home. So now they have Gurukulas where they let the children stay at home, but go during the day. And so we've learned that. Whereas the traditional system there was a lot of detachment amongst both the parents and the child, and it worked. And the way the child was disciplined, the child appreciated it. But now that kind of discipline could be looked at as abusive. So then it seems to me that Prabhupada expected us to respond to that. Like Prabhupada, he was recommending polygamy at one point, and the devotee said to Prabhupada, "That's illegal. We can't do that." And there was a principle there. There are more women than men, so women need to be married. And so he didn't know that. So could you talk a little bit about the culture he came from, and then how he viewed the world through that culture, and how sometimes it didn't sync with the Western culture, and if we didn't say anything, perhaps sometimes we didn't say anything when we should have. Maybe you could think of incidents where we should have said something. Or maybe we were afraid to say because we thought it would be offensive, or it would be a demonstration of lack of our faith, or we just questioned our own intelligence in situations like that.
I think you brought up the biggest example is our Gurukulas, where we, my faith, my belief is that Srila Prabhupada was somehow innocent, you could say, of the possibilities that we ultimately encountered in the Gurukul system, and that
the severity of the potential negativity that could arise from establishing.
He had. I mean, we have to understand. This is one way to look at things, because we know about how a Uttam Adhikari, who sees everyone as a devotee of Krishna, has to come down from that vision to a discriminating platform. We see how Srila Prabhupada embraced the devotees, trusted them in so many different ways, gave them his heart with full faith and sincerity that they were going to do the right thing.
So
I don't know that he even had. I mean, he was coming from Vrindavan, a place, a land where, at least at that time, India has changed now, but in those days, the culture was still very strong in terms of gentlemanly behavior and
chastity.
Yeah, and just everyone behaving properly with children. At least from his perspective, what went on behind the scenes, or in other cultural situations there, he just may not have been aware of it.
But the argument could be given. I was in charge of a temple at the age of 19. So, how mature was I to be in charge of other people and in charge of finances? And I was only a devotee 8 months. So now I'm have this money in my hand. I have these people in my hand, both men and women. And Prabhupada's doing that. Now he could be criticized for that. So he could be.
So he took risks.
What's your understanding? That's what he had to do. He just had to put his faith in his disciples and just do it. There was no, and just whatever the damage was, collateral damage, just had to accept that and move on.
I mean, he took a lot of risks throughout his life, and I think he felt that there was a higher purpose, and that there might be people might get hurt along the way. He certainly wasn't his intention, but he took risks with us.
Yeah.
He was willing, and we were willing to accept those risks. It's not that we were forced to.
But it's interesting, just like you have daughters, I have a daughter. So if we look back to how temples were run in 1970, and we probably wouldn't, knowing what we know, we would tell our daughter, well, don't move in because these people are not mature.
Yeah.
And Prabhupada is just, encouraging everyone to join. I guess, of course, we say it's a higher purpose. It's, the whatever damage is there is minimal compared to the benefit of being Krishna conscious. And
yeah,
he had no other choice. What else could be done? But the interesting thing was he wasn't really, the other argument people could give, he wasn't really training. He was training us in spiritual principles, but practically he wasn't training us in mature ways of dealing with people and so forth, other than in terms of Vaishnava etiquette. So,
well, I would argue that's no. I think he was definitely
at least
training
I
us in that way.
didn't feel particularly I was getting training in dealing with the practical things I had to deal with, other than the spiritual program. That, yeah. But in terms of,
he trained his initial team. I mean, and then he wanted them to train us. But
still, like the details of management. Like now we have leadership courses, management courses, grihasta courses. None of that.
No.
Yeah. So that's also an interesting phenomenon. It's kind of like, do it and Krishna will give you the intelligence type of thing. It seems that's how we operated, that paradigm.
Yeah. Yeah. He and he was able to transmit some of that Shakti through the society, so that things did happen. There were amazing things that happened with this. I don't know if he used the term band of monkeys, but I think he did at one point. Yeah.
My monkey. This in the Bhagavatam.
I'm not sure.
Lord Rama and his monkey soldiers,
Yes,
and Prabhupada and his monkey disciples.
So somehow by bringing out our enthusiasm and sincerity and desire to serve his mission, we were able to accomplish things that and what does Krishna say? He says he's the source of intelligence. So he's the talent.
Of course, the argument is that some people did some stupid things and some people suffered.
People
suffered. Okay, well, let's go to another topic, because what can you say? It is what it is. And
yes.
I mean, I think there's lessons there, but on both sides, because in reaction to that, we may be reluctant to empower people who are young or less experienced, which is a sign perhaps of intelligent caution, but also it can limit what we can do and restrict people. So let's go to the Prabhupada as a person as opposed to Prabhupada as guru. Now, some people would not want to distinguish the two. They would only see Prabhupada as their guru, Sakshad Hari, representative of Krishna, worship as good as God, and so forth. And they would feel it would be offensive because Shastra says, don't ever think of the spiritual master as an ordinary person.
Yeah.
And then you have the other angle where people will look and say, well, Prabhupada has a personality, he grew up in a particular culture, was influenced by that culture. Of course, some people might say, how could you say the pure devotees influenced by the culture? But it appears there's some influence there, whatever the culture and the education and the upbringing and so forth. So could you speak on that?
Well, there obviously is influence. I mean, his accent to begin with. I mean, you can't say that he didn't have an Indian accent. Of course,
Bhakti Siddhanta was not a good manager, and his movement was managed by someone else. Yeah. So there is kind of this idea that some people have, if you're a pure devotee.
Who ended up, I mean, that's a good story, because Kunja Babu, he was, the others in the Gaudiya Math were always looking, see, what's going on here, because they could understand Kunja Babu's mentality.
Motives were not pure.
Srila Prabhupada, Bhakti Siddhanta just said, but he can do this.
Yeah.
He used him.
So there's a clear example of a nature, a particular nature. Even though he's a pure devotee, he has a particular nature. But some people, they don't like to acknowledge that. They think that's in some way limiting or offensive. Anyway, go ahead.
To ascribe
because then it
personality
seems,
to...
It seems, to ascribe personality, because then it seems you're describing a limitation, that he's, in some way conditioned by this personality or this nature or social cultural conditioning, where he's actually transcendental personality. He's not influenced by the modes of nature. So maybe you could talk about.
But
that.
he is he presented to us a personality, and that personality had so many qualities, so many endearing qualities, unique qualities. It's if he were some bland type of person,
generic guru that laughs at everything,
then what would be our response? He had, and some of those characteristics of his personality is his warmth, his humor, his boldness.
Well, do you think also this relates to the idea of people's expectation of a guru, what he's supposed to be? And even after Prabhupada's disappearance, they become initiated and they find out, well, my guru made a mistake, or my guru did something in the past that wasn't proper, and then they become confused, disturbed. Speak about that.
In relation to Srila Prabhupada.
Yeah.
Well, Srila Prabhupada's life has a history. I mean, he didn't. He was engaged in the world for 50 odd years, in business and family life, and he says how his business failed. He ascribes this to the mercy of Krishna. He ascribes his failures. He doesn't say that he doesn't try to avoid blame or responsibility, but he, at the same time, he says this was the mercy of Krishna, because it pushed me towards doing what I was resisting doing. He describes it as he was fearful, in his words. And this is one thing that we have to think about. I mean, Srila Prabhupada describes himself. He talks about himself. He talks about his personal nature. He talks about his past. Do we accept what he says about himself?
Some people don't. Some people do.
And how do we accept it? Do we take it as, one could say, well, this is somehow is an indication of some failing, or you can take it as an indication of his personality, the personality that he developed in his service, in his mood of serving Krishna. His personality developed from a young age. He tells his stories about wanting a gun for each hand, being a leader. He talks about how amongst his childhood friends, he was looked to as the leader, how he organized things. So these are all aspects of his personality which served him and helped him to do what he did.
Well, there's a point of view that some may have that Prabhupada descended to spread Krishna consciousness, and that vision of Prabhupada is what creates their faith, or it becomes a necessity. That Prabhupada's glory is more where he came from than what he did. And then there's another point of view where some devotees will say it's neither here nor there if he descended or he was becoming perfect or became perfect through sadhana. What he did is what's important, and even more so, or equally important, what he taught. And his ontological position is not of utmost importance. At least it seems he didn't want us to think that way, because he didn't talk about it.
No, he didn't.
And even sometimes he talked contrarily, to say in my last life I didn't do anything except I did one sinful thing, like I killed a snake or something, or I was a doctor. He's talking about his last life.
Yes.
But then there's the concept that he came to spread Krishna consciousness. So where's the last life? And so then we get confused, and maybe he was purposely doing that to show us that the guru doesn't have to be on that platform. because he does, as you say, he does talk a lot about his past life, which is, when you hear it, it just sounds like, in many ways, the life of many people. My son, we went to the movies, or we did this, or I didn't get along so well with my wife, and Grihastha life, I was always working, and it was difficult, and I wasn't a good businessman, and I could have done well, but I was proud, and I didn't listen, and therefore I didn't get this job. And these seem to be very human-like characteristics.
Yeah. And the end result is he comes to America and he founds the International Society for Christian Consciousness. So how is this unfolding? Why is it unfolding? The thing that comes out, and I think that we've heard him say, and it's my faith, that from the beginning, wherever that is, the mission, the attraction, the mood of serving Radha Krishna was there in his heart. And so that pushed him.
And that I never forgot Krishna.
Never forgot Krishna.
And never engaged in sinful activity. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, it's obvious we're born in the family of a pure devotee. And
so, beyond that, as you say, it's not really relevant.
It seems to me personally, I find the most inspiration is from the degree of surrender and faith in his guru.
Yeah.
More because it's almost like, if you say, well, he came for this mission, it almost like writes that off. Like, well, of course, he was sent for that.
Some people say that some of the Gaudiya, his godbrothers, who describe him as Shaktiyavesh, use that as an excuse that, well, he is Shaktiyavesh. We didn't do anything
because we're not
Shaktiyavesh.
And how do you become Shaktiyavesh? Let's see if there's some questions out there. I guess there aren't any questions. The Bhakti Carol said, when was Srila Prabhupada fearful? Didn't he trust Krishna to protect him? What were you saying he was fearful about? What was the context?
He describes how Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was coming to him in dreams.
Oh, right.
Calling him to leave family life, and he was fearful of leaving family life in a sense. And you can say, well, is this attachment, or is it the natural anxiety that we all feel of failing to serve Krishna adequately? I mean, you can put yourself in his position, seeing his godbrothers and the failures of the Gaudiya Math, and you can say, well, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta during his life was not pushing him, and now he's pushing him. Am I ready? Am I really up to it? That's the kind of anxiety as I can see. And then ultimately his path was made clear and he went. And
so you're saying
even though he became, there was a sense of an anxiety about how will this all work out? I'm going on later on going on a boat.
Can I actually do it?
Can I do this? But then surrendering.
But there's also the example of Arjuna, who was upset that Abhimanyu was killed, his son.
Yeah.
And so here Arjuna is supposed to be a pure devotee, and he's lamenting. And Prabhupada said he may be lamenting, but he didn't give up his duty.
Right.
So there can be room for this kind of fear or concern. How will I be able to do this? Will I be able to do it? But still, in spite of that, one continues.
Yeah.
So, the impression we're given, the way Prabhupada explains it, is like, I'm not ready to leave my family. Or how will it be possible?
How can I really do this?
Yeah. Prabhupada, he had a son at that time who was 10, or a daughter?
10 years old.
Wasn't it a daughter?
His youngest son was 10 years old at that time.
Uh-huh. So, maybe Bhakti and Carol, that helps you understand a little more. His youngest son is 10 years old, and Bhaktisiddhanta is coming telling him, okay, now it's time to give up everything. And he had never lived in a temple. He wasn't a brahmachari. So it was also, that was also another challenge. But it was in his heart to do it, and he did it. And he kept going to his godbrother. He had the dream twice. And he was asking his godbrother, do you think Krishna is destroying my family life and my business because he wants me to do this? And he said, yes, I think so. More questions?
Let's see.
She's asking, Pallavi's asking, we're talking about surrender. What is surrender? We're talking about, in what context were we talking about surrender? Surrendering to Prabhupada or Prabhupada surrendering to Krishna? I don't remember. Pallavi, why don't you explain? Well, he's going, how does one totally surrender and stay that way and not give way to the same conditioned responses? Okay, that's the question. Well, it's also, I think firstly, it's how you define surrender. Because some of us define surrender in a way that we can't surrender. It's like, okay, surrender means giving up everything, so I can't surrender now. At one time Prabhupada said surrender means to accept Krishna's words. Krishna says, I'm God, you accept that he's God. Krishna says, you're a servant, you accept that. You're surrendered. So, another definition of surrender is just coming closer to Krishna. What brings you closer to Krishna? And another definition is expecting Krishna's protection or being confident of that protection. So these are, you don't want to define surrender in a way that you can't do it. Now, there may be different degrees of surrender. And, you may tell yourself, well, I'm not surrendered. And I would say, well, take another step. Do something that gets you a little closer to Krishna. If we think of how much Krishna loves us and how much affection he has for us, then wanting to come closer it won't seem like surrender anymore. It'll seem like this is just an act of love. Just like your wife or your husband. You don't consciously feel that you're surrendered to them. You feel that you love them. But someone else, your friend, may say, whoa, you're really surrendered. You do anything your wife asks you. You're a dancing dog. But you don't think like that. You just think, I love her. I want to do what she wants. I want to do what my children want. I love them. So it's nicer to look at surrender more from the point of view of affection. And therefore it's natural to give up. And also the beauty of Krishna. He's so attractive, it attracts us. Attracts our heart. We give it up. But I wanted to... Bhakti and Carol was saying which subjects did Prabhupada speak on that were proven false. So you want to answer that question?
There's a few examples that are given that that he quoted some science from the early 20th century about the size of brain size and so on. And, 36 ounces, 32 ounces, something like that, which.
And brain size indicating the level of intelligence.
And then relating that to intelligence. And contemporary studies don't show such distinctions, neither do they show correlations between brain size and intelligence. So, but again, this was something that he was quoting. He was using it as an example to make a point. And this intelligence point is interesting also because this is an example of the evolution of language and the use of language, because this one word intelligence has many meanings. It has we now in modern psychology, etc. They'll talk about emotional intelligence and social intelligence and technical intelligence and language intelligence and mathematical intelligence. So the various varieties of intelligence, and even there's also varieties of intelligence in spiritual life. So how we understand Srila Prabhupada's views about intelligence, that's a deep study, and not something that I think we can understand by taking one specific example or one specific statement, because we can get into trouble. Srila Prabhupada would make he would make categorical statements. He was, and then on one point, and then make the same categorical statement, which was contradictory, on another.
It seemed to me in a lot of the discussions about intelligence that he had, which were not, they were discussions that not so much about male-female intelligence in his books, other than the general thing you find in his books is, if you don't surrender to Krishna, you're less intelligent. Or if you don't control your senses, you're less intelligent. Yeah. But in conversations, it seemed to come up in terms of women being exploited by men, thinking that the man loves them, but actually he's taking advantage of that, and that being a symptom of less intelligence or lack of intelligence. Of course, you can say men also fall for women, but that's a particularly common problem where women become, for lack of a better word, bamboozled by a man, his words, his so-called affection, his so-called protection, when his interests are really more to enjoy the woman, to get something from her, and not take responsibility. And so Prabhupada, the whole context of those conversations was, a man gets you pregnant and he doesn't take responsibility. You should be married. It's his duty to protect you. That's not protection. And you don't see that. So if you're actually, intelligence means to see that. And there are many books written about that, how women continually throughout the ages are being bewildered by so-called affectionate men who impregnate them and leave them. That's what they want. So it doesn't, it didn't, in my understanding or my reading of those conversations and what Prabhupada said, it didn't deal so much with how qualified a woman is to run a company, or how qualified, sometimes he would say, generally male brain is better suited for philosophy or science. That doesn't mean there aren't good female scientists or good female philosophers, but he would say generally that, looking at biologically. But I think sometimes women took it in the wrong way, where they felt perhaps belittled or undermined, almost to the point of losing some degree of self-confidence, thinking, well, I'm less intelligent, I'm not capable of the things that I'm actually capable of.
Yes, and men taking it also the wrong way and using it to keep
control them. Yeah. So
that's a deep subject to really try to understand the intent, the mood, the purpose of some of these statements.
And also Prabhupada's is coming from a culture where male and female were not competitive. They had very distinct roles. They were satisfied with those roles. Women were appreciated for those roles. So in a society where women are not appreciated for the role, the traditional roles, then they want to start competing, and then it creates problems. I think also in my understanding of this, a lot of times it's not a question of women not being capable, it's just a question of social roles. If it's proper for them to do certain things, not that they couldn't do it better than men sometimes, but is it actually proper for them to do it in the social interaction? And you find so much problem with sexual harassment in corporate world today. Is it the best thing for women to be closely working with men? From the Veda paradigm, we would say no, it should be restricted, and it was restricted because the women were at home. They weren't competing with men in the workplace. So, but now, because the women are out in the workplace as much as the men, then it's all other set of circumstances that we're dealing with that we didn't have to deal with. So he's coming from another paradigm where I think a lot of things he would say within that paradigm were not controversial, but for us they became controversial because we didn't understand the paradigm he's coming from. And when I see Prabhupada speaking about women, I just see a grandfather talking to his granddaughter and saying, watch out for these men. If there's a relationship you have with a man, it should be with the man you're going to marry, not with anybody else. They're taking advantage of you. Don't fall for it. That's what I would see. And they would argue that. No, I'm an independent, I can make my own decision. And he's saying, yeah, but they're getting you pregnant. So that's not smart. And they didn't get it. And then Prabhupada would say, therefore I say less intelligent, because they would argue it, and he'd say that's less intelligent. So anyway, so we have 4 minutes, so there are more questions. So we're talking about surrender. so Carol was saying, I wouldn't think Prabhupada felt fear. He was pure devotee. And once Prabhupada was asked, he said, what is it like to be Krishna conscious? He said, no fear. But it seems like he was playing the pastime in Grihastha life of someone who was in it, getting out of it.
Yeah.
Whether he's playing it or whether actually there was something within him where there was a hesitation for that time.
Yeah, how those emotions. I mean, even if it's Krishna's pastime or his lila, the emotions are real. The feelings are real.
I mean, why would he even talk about it? I mean, he talked about it a lot. He told that story a lot. And I never thought, oh, this is minimizing Prabhupada's position. I always thought it was glorifying his position, that he disentangled himself. I guess it goes back to the question I was asking before. If you see Prabhupada as this pure devotee who descended and completely transcendental, but then there's the other idea that even the transcendental person comes in the world, we're brushing with this world. There's, this world is contaminated. Like Lord Shiva contacts ignorance. So is there, or like one time Prabhupada said he got angry at a devotee and he apologized. And he said, just see, in my old age I'm becoming angry. So apologizing means that he felt that it was inappropriate. So is it possible for someone who's pure to still, in the impure atmosphere, to sometimes become contaminated? Now some people would say, for me saying that's offensive. And I'm just throwing it out. It seems that Prabhupada's expressing some kind of those emotions. Or even after he became a devotee, I don't know how I was going to do this. I was going to go back to India. Now I see it's all Krishna's mercy. So he's saying, I didn't see it was going to happen that way before, but now I see Krishna has given me so many sons and daughters, I left my other sons and daughters. So it seems that he's expressing his own realization that perhaps there was he couldn't see how it was going to happen, or there was a little doubt, or how's Krishna going to do this, and so forth.
And also a feeling that, we know at the end of his life with us, his presence with us, how he called some of his god brothers, and how he was asking them to forgive him for his strong words. And so he had feelings. Srila Prabhupada felt emotions, and those emotions were all connected, I believe, to his primary emotion, which was love for Krishna. But in that emotion, there's so many other emotions that may arise that are connected to that. His love for Krishna did not exclude love of his family. He loved his family. So you can see that it was hard. It's a hard thing to leave his family behind and do what he had to do. And
later on, Tamal Krishna Maharaj convinced him that he should support his family.
Yeah, it was not only, Abhiram told me a few times that how Srila Prabhupada,
actually it was Abhiram. I'm sorry. That was Abhiram who...
Yeah, he felt, Srila Prabhupada felt, I left them.
Yeah,
I
should take care of them. It's my duty.
For them. And he would receive his youngest son, especially. Tried so many ways to engage him, help him out, Vrindavan Day. So, he made arrangements in his last days.
So let's see what Bhakti and Carol said. Everyone wants to be free from all kinds of fear, and everyone wants the fullest extent of happiness. I guess this is a purport. The perfect process for achieving this here and now is recommended in the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is uttered by such a great authority as Sukadeva Goswami. By hearing about and glorifying the Lord, all a person's activities become molded into spiritual activities, and thus all conceptions of material miseries become completely vanquished. Everyone wants to be free from... I guess he's writing that again. Huh? Okay. Could he have been saying he didn't know details how things would happen, that the Lord was in control? It seems like we're going back to this point. it seems the way he expresses things are expressed more like a person who's not on the highest platform. Like of course Bhaktivinoda Thakur would express himself that way also, and oftentimes the pure devotee would express themselves more as an ordinary person. So you could read it that way, that he's expressing himself as an ordinary person, so we have the confidence that we as ordinary persons can also achieve the highest position. You could say he's expressing it out of his humility, or you could even say he's expressing it because that's objectively what was happening, and he was just being realistic. I mean, there's different degrees of purity, and you may be completely surrendered in one way, and then in another way, perhaps there's something more to learn, that Krishna's sending you in a situation. And now, I mean, that's the way Prabhupada expressed it. Like, I didn't know it was going to happen. Who know that I would come to your country? Who know that Krishna would? This is what Prabhupada's words. Who know that Krishna would send you? Who know we had this? He was expressing it. He said, "Who knew? Who knew?" And then he came to the conclusion. He said, "It's all the mercy of my Guru Maharaj." So he's like looking at it in retrospect, that I didn't know these things. I was reluctant to come, and who knew this would happen? But now we can see it's all Krishna's arrangement.
This is our relationship with Krishna. I mean, he doesn't, and it goes back to what we started with, this idea of omniscience. He does not, even when we attain pure love, we're still the tiny parts. We're never omniscient in the sense of directly knowing everything. We know Krishna.
Or didn't Prabhupada say...
And by knowing Krishna, we know everything.
Didn't Prabhupada say, I know everything Krishna wants me to know?
That's right. And when Krishna is pushing us in a certain way, preparing us for some role in life, that preparation sometimes is a little tough. If it were just...
we must all want to see it.
It may involve a little anxiety or something to bring out that intensity.
Well, it also seems you were saying this, and also seems from that story that Prabhupada also wanted to know if this is what Krishna wants.
Yeah.
Like I have a 10-year-old son. Should I leave my family? I mean, it seems my Guru Maharaj is calling me. The business is not going, but still, I have how many children? 3, 4?
4 children.
I have 4 children. How will they live?
Is this 3 at that time?
Yeah. How will they live? Is this the right thing to do? So that's... seems to be Prabhupada's questioning. Is this what Krishna wants? And then if this is what he wants, how am I going to be able to do this? Being responsible, considering the family, and also considering, am I really qualified to do this? Am I able to, we took sannyas as young men. We took it very cheaply. Yeah, just take sannyas, no big deal. Here Prabhupada's saying, I'm horrified of it. We're all thinking, well, this is great. Become sannyas. What a life, travel and preach. People will take care of me. I'm a sannyasi, I'll be respected. I have nothing to worry about. And Prabhupada's saying, oh no, sannyasa is something very, very serious. It's a life of austerity, renunciation. I haven't lived that way, and how will I do it? So he's looking at it in a very realistic way, and trying to do his best for Krishna, make sure it's the best thing to do. Okay, so I think we can end here. Okay, well, thank you all. It's good to be back with you. And what we'll do next week is all a mystery to me at this point. We'll see what Krishna reveals. But
it'll be fun, though.
We had intended to talk more about Prabhupada. But I thought this was an important conversation. So we'll see. We'll leave it as a mystery. And when Krishna reveals what we're going to talk about, maybe we'll send you an email. And if not, just come back next week and you'll find out. And thank you, and
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.